Annalise stared at the spot where the home guard was assembled as she waited for Uncle Harry to take the box of china from her and load it onto the wagon. Some of the men were lined up before the corral fence taking shots at tin cans, while some were gathered into one of two clusters set apart from the shooters. After each volley, the men would bring their tins to Teague, who was seated in the shade of Mr. Brighton's oak tree, and he would send them to the appropriate cluster. Like God parting the lambs and the goats, Annalie thought. He saw her staring at him, but he made no acknowledgment of her. He'd been like that since the ball. He had hardly said 10 words to her in the past 2 weeks, even after she made an attempt at apologizing for her chastisement, though that apology had been marred by her confession that she did not believe his story about his illness, regardless of what Papa had said. She still thought he had been drunk with morphine that night at the party. No man in his right mind would make such a spectacle of himself. She had been mortified by the whispers she heard throughout the night. Admittedly, the gossiping women were from the society outside Newkirk, but they were hurtful nonetheless. One would ask how anyone could be so uncouth as to sleep at a social function, and another would answer that nothing more could be expected from someone from Alabama. What was an Alabaman doing all the way up in Ohio? Spying for the Confederacy? Oh, what rubbish. What would he be spying for in this tiny little hamlet? Honestly, why Mrs. Hardy didn't pack up and move to Columbus was beyond them. But of course she couldn't leave the society of the town. They had laughed at this, and Annalie felt her neck burn. She was certain they were looking at her. She acted like she was listening to the conversation Matthew and Mr. Smith were having while the whispers continued. Something had awakened their young Southerner. Wasn't he staying with one of the local families? Yes, he was with the doctor's family. That was one of the girls sitting near Mr. Hardy. Annalie turned to Sam's arrival in the parlor and commented on the heat of the ballroom. She didn't really hear his reply, but turned to Matthew's complaint about the Brightons. "Mrs. Brighton is in mourning for her brother, Matthew," she'd said. Well, Miss Warner certainly had some nerve to admonish a man in front of his guests. Did they hear her tone? Of course Mr. Hardy couldn't know such things. He'd only just returned. Oh, wouldn't they look! Their sleepy spy was about to leave. No, he was saying something. Annalie had stiffened as Teague started to cry during his recitation of the speech from the common soldier from Henry V, and might have cried with him had the outburst been less like a diatribe aimed at everyone in the room, deserving and innocent alike. Finally he left the room, what he should have done in the first place. Annalie felt too tired to stand. Her knees were trembling, and she held her fan so tightly with both hands anyone watching her might have thought that she wanted to break it. The silence in the parlor gradually dissipated, and she heard the whispers resume. They didn't know whether to applaud or get him a glass of water. She knew what Tom would have done. He'd have turned around and told them what thickheads they were. But she couldn't be like Tom this time, however much she told herself she should have been. Instead, she'd censored her disdain for the women and taken out her anger on a tearful man, the very man she should have defended. She was sorry for it, so why did he have to be so unforgiving? If he'd just forgive her, they could stop this contest of who was angrier with whom. Uncle Harry lifted the box of china from her arms and surprised her with the sudden absence of weight. "I think that'll be all for this load," he called to stop Aunt Clara from bringing anything more out at the door. Papa and he climbed up onto the seat and started for the cave where Coretta and Mama were stacking the merchandise. "You girls pack up the fabrics now." Aunt Clara nodded, but Annalie began walking over to the corral. Teague looked sober enough, though when she checked his pill case that morning, she had noticed he was certainly not lax in taking his doses. "Mr. Brighton, please ask the men who already know they can't shoot to step out of the line. They're wasting bullets," Teague said before he put two of his pills in his mouth and swallowed them dry. "Keeping on schedule, I see," Annalie said from behind him. He didn't turn to her. "Beg pardon?" "What are you doing?" "Sewing dragon teeth." "Well, Cadmus, is Morgan really so close?" "No, nor is he likely to be." "May I see where he is?" Teague pointed to the map as he inspected another man's tin and directed Mr. Brighton to put the unscathed can back on the fence. The map reminded Annalee of an adolescent boy. There were pockmarks everywhere. At each location Morgan had been rumored to be, an X covered the name of the town. A few of these X's were circled to indicate confirmation of his location. Morgan's known path cut the state with a solid line, while the paths of his pursuers trailed it in various derivations of dashes. "Where do you think he'll go now?" Annalee asked. "He'll try for that river if he has to shoot the horses and paddle over on their carcasses," Teague answered. "Mr. Brighton, pull that man out of line. He's already gone once." "What if he can't get to the river?" Teague looked at her. "Well, look here," she said. "If he goes up past East Liverpool, he'll have no other way to get into West Virginia other than to circle back and try again. That means he'll need to lead our boys far enough north that they're no longer blocking the river, and that puts him far enough north to come at Newkirk from up here." Annalee traced the hypothetical path with her finger. "Do you have anyone watching the roads?" Teague tapped his index finger on the table. "First of all, Morgan would be a fool to pass back through territory where he's been shot to pieces. You're assuming that the only threat to him is in these dotted lines, but there are also militia scattered out there, and no doubt they'll post garrisons along the river to keep him from crossing, even if he could avoid the main force through another, 250 miles it would take to even attempt what you're suggesting. Morgan will be caught long before he could become that desperate." "But it could be done," Annalee insisted. "If he decided to turn idiot, maybe." "You ought to put some people out to watch the roads." "I have scouts both south and west of here." "But not north." "No." "Well, if you're so certain Morgan's not coming at all, why would you even bother to watch the southern and western roads and not waste a man for the northern and eastern ones?" "I didn't have enough boys to cover those." "Send some of those men over there who can't shoot." Teague lowered his voice. "I'm not letting any one of these fools go out by himself. Do you want to get somebody killed?" "All right, then I'll go." Teague laughed. "If Morgan's not coming, what harm could I come to?" Annalee insisted. "And on the odd chance that he does come, I'd still be in negligible danger. Surely they won't shoot at a lady." "I'd feel sorry for any rebel who captured you. You'd talk him to death." "Perhaps that's what we ought to do, then. Plant me in the middle of the column and let me talk to the general." "Go pack some more calico." "They're not taking the calico to the cave, just the silks and organdy," Annalee snapped before turning on her heel and marching back toward the livery stable. 5 minutes later she walked Benedict out and then galloped north past the corral, making a special effort to come close enough to the oak tree that the dust Benedict kicked up would fall in a filmy layer on Teague. Wednesday, 24th September 1862. I've thought to make an assessment of my belongings this morning, having heard that the area where I fell had been in Confederate hands until the early morning hours when I was found. Though the plunderers left my journal and Father's little Bible, which, I'm sorry to say, are both a bit blood-stained, my spectacles and Father's watch are gone, together with, of course, my pistol and sword. Afternoon, Wednesday. What an imbecile I've been all my life. I watched a boy die beside me today. He was at most 13. Like an idiot, I thought Father's Bible might have some comfort. I opened to 23rd Psalm, but it was so smeared with blood I couldn't read it. Instead, my eyes lit on 22nd Psalm. I read down only a few lines, and I had a revelation. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Because he does indeed kill us for sport. Aubrey knew all along. He was only trying to find someone to convince him that he was wrong. Why should I go on deluding myself like he did? Why should I have any use for God when he so obviously has no use for me? How good of the rebels to leave me something I no longer want. I've thrown the book as far away from me as I can. It is still lying there on the ground. I don't care ever to look on it again. God can just keep his word to himself.